Hello and welcome back to Simple Time Studios, where I read adventures and solo play for your entertainment. As always, if you like what you hear, then be sure to like, subscribe, and comment to appease the algorithm gods. Their horror more terrifying than anything in Grimmerspace. Speaking of Grimmerspace, let's start with the setting truths that help define our adventure. Welcome to the Gliding Room Galaxy. Our adventure once again takes place in the Grimmerspace setting, a science fiction horror setting created by RNGM Games. Specifically, we're going to an empty region of space in the Vodikun Empire that has a bit of a pirate problem. Unfortunately for the pirates, they're about to have problems of their own. In space, no one can hear you scream or test starship combat rules. So while we're going to be doing the latter, using the Intergalactic Heroes beta rules for starship encounters, I imagine, since this is Grimmerspace, there will still be plenty of the former occurring. And while this is part of Robert Manus's campaign, we are taking a moment away from him to focus on a new character, Jerry Riggs, the pilot of the Cerberus, and see what he has been doing since getting separated from the others. And this adventure starts as something of a last stand. Jerry is flying a stolen pirate fighter that he's scratched off the pirate regalia off of. The original owners would very much like to have it back and are chasing him across the star system. He needs to fight them off or evade them while waiting for his FTL drive to finish charging back up. Our rules and rubrics that will help define this setting. Our primary rule set will be the Intergalactic Heroes beta rules. The Solo Game Master's Guide by Geek Gamers will be used for oracles and other supplementary rules. Everyday Heroes will be used when necessary to supplement the beta rules. And lastly, Jerry Riggs will start his adventure as a second-level Aux Jock. Okay, let the story begin. Between the Stars. 8 hours. That's all he had left. That's all he had left to wait in this uninhabited system before his engines finished recharging and he could jump again. Hopefully the next system would have a civilized government he could surrender to and get rid of this cursed starfighter. Hopefully his pursuers wouldn't find him before then and he could just drift and absorb the sights the system provided him. Jerry Riggs' saucer-like ears quivered as he turned his head and looked around at the superiority fighter's interior again. The control console replied with the same reassuring electronic beeps and chirps that the Orion mouse had been hearing for hours now. Subsystems were all reporting back positive. Sensors reported nothing in the immediate area. Everything appeared fine. The brown-furred mouse anthro rubbed his head, running his fingers through his head fur as he exhaled. His whiskers twitched as he fought with an anxiety that had been following him ever since he escaped. It had been a very strange and stressful ordeal since he had gotten separated from the rest of the group. Where everyone else had jettisoned off into escape pods that were later teleported by Sunder Mage magic, he stayed on the Cerberus a little while longer to buy the others some time before going into the pods himself. Next thing he knew, both the damaged ship and he were also whisked away to different locations. Stars and Forerunners only knew where the Cerberus ended up, but Jerry found himself in the lower decks of the pirate carrier that had been hounding the Cerberus the moment it arrived in this galaxy. An adventure that led to him stealing the starfighter he currently sat in and being chased by its original owners across two systems. Two systems, a 24-hour recharge period between jumps. He had been on the run for 2 days and trapped in the pilot's seat of this fighter for the entire time. 2 days trapped in an uncomfortable chair built for a pilot roughly 2 feet taller and with little food and less water. No idea where he was, and no idea where a friendly port was. At least the air supplies still seemed fine, so that was one thing he didn't need to worry about. If only he could explain the whispers. Have you finally accepted the truth? Right on cue, the whispers appeared in the back of his mind. Even now, Jerry wasn't entirely sure if this was the ship somehow speaking with him telepathically, or if this was his own inner critic trying to get the best of him. Either way, the sinister voice of the whispers did not inspire much confidence. Jerry declined to answer, instead bringing up the sensor readout while checking the fuel for the impulse engines. He still had enough fuel, a consequence of being frugal with the fuel he had spent and using inertia to his advantage. But was there anything else on the long-range sensor? Going to ask the Oracle if there's anything hostile on Jerry's sensors. I give it a 50-50 chance at this stage, and 98% says no. Jerry exhales. The scope was clear of hostile sensor profiles for now. They still hadn't caught up with him yet. He checked the sensor readout for anything else. A habitable planet with a breathable atmosphere or a space station would be nice. Asking the Oracle again if there's a habitable planet. 50-50 odds, and 77% says no. Is there a space station? Again, 50-50. 63% says no as well. The sensor readout came back negative. The only planets were airless rocks and a gas giant, and apparently no one found this system interesting enough to put up even a way station to resupply travelers. He looked over at the clock, counting down to his next jump. He didn't even spend 15 minutes doing all of this. Nothing left to do but fly towards one of those infinity wells on the opposite edge of the system. According to the galactic map, this would take him to some place called Tharul, which hopefully was a place where he could finally find some help. Gently adjusting his heading with the maneuvering thrusters, Jerry aimed the fighter squarely at the infinity well location and engaged the throttle at maximum burn. Once he had built up enough momentum, he disengaged the thruster and let the fighter coast towards his destination. At his current rate, he should be at the well just in time for the miniaturized gravity injection drive to finish charging up for another jump. Might as well take advantage of the lull in pursuit while he still can. "You can't escape. They will find you or you will die," the voice whispered again. Jerry took a second to control his breathing, slow and steady, as he willed his anxiety back down. Somewhere in the hull, the metal hull groaned softly like it had the last few times the whispering voice tried to speak to him. "If I try, I might succeed and survive. If I give in to fear and don't try, I will die," he said aloud in a soft voice. It was stupid, but it seemed to work for keeping whatever the voice actually was placated long enough for him to have some time to think or focus on keeping the fighter from crashing or getting too heavily damaged. That was the main point in favor of the voice being some part of the ship he did not understand yet. It seemed aware when it was in danger and refused to distract him when he was focused on keeping the two of them out of trouble. There was nothing else to do but either watch the clock slowly count down, which Jerry already knew was an exercise in futility, or try to catch up on lost sleep while he still could. That was also not guaranteed, as he had been plagued by strange nightmares ever since he stole this ship. Nightmares that made no sense, as they didn't always have anything to do with his current situation. Sometimes he was alone in a cavernous room where the walls were made out of a silvery metal. Other times he was getting hunted by a metallic statue in the form of an apex predator. It made no sense. At this point, I'm going to say that the Kusorian pirates do jump in. A single light carrier jumps in at the edge of the system. They launch 1d4 fighters, and I roll a 2. 2 fighter craft with the baseline stats and light particle guns from as written in the Intergalactic Heroes beta rules are coming for him. The clock had ticked down to 7 hours when the light computer beeped with a warning. The fighter had picked up the sensor profile of a Corsarium light carrier appearing behind him, and a profile of 2 smaller fighters launching towards him. It began. They would be on him soon. They knew he could only move so fast without burning a lot of fuel, and that he had to wait until his engines recharged. Limitations they did not have. And time for a Starship event. We're going to use the task difficulty DC for Corvetta, which is 13. To survive this encounter, Jerry will need to perform some invasive maneuvers to hold off pursuit long enough to get to the next infinity well, and perhaps engage the gravity induction drive prematurely, which will likely damage it, but will also get him out of his starship event. His pursuit will need to boost thrusters to catch up, then try to disable his ship so the carrier can catch up and tow him in. First, Jerry is going to start by calculating his trajectory and then try to achieve an escape vector. That starts with a computer's check and a pilot check. Computer's check is an 18 total success, and he can attempt to achieve escape vector with no disadvantage on his piloting check. Piloting check is a 25 total, also crushing the target number. The moment he heard the warning from the navigation computer and saw where the pirates appeared, he immediately went into action, slender fingers punching a handful of buttons and bringing up the stellar topography of the system. He calculated both the pirate's trajectory and the vector he would need to run to escape before gunning his thrusters as hard as they could go. A smile crossed his thin lips, pulling back on his bucked front teeth, as the enraged pirate shrank in his sensor scope behind him. He then looked at the timer for the gravity induction drive to finish charging. Almost time. If anything, he might still be a little early. But with the pirate still hot on his heels, he didn't really have much of a choice. Alright, now to get the FTL online. Another Starship event. So we're maneuvering to FTL prep, spooling up the nav comp, and increasing to FTL. This will be a piloting check, a computer's check, and a natural sciences check. And since Jerry does not have natural sciences as a skill, it'll be a straight intelligence check. Maybe the target number of 13 wasn't too easy after all. Pilot is a 14, total success. Computer is a 10, failure. Attempting computers again, 8 total for another failure. He can't jump. This isn't good. Or is it? Maneuvering into position in front of the Infinity Well, a barely perceptible gravitational anomaly that apparently allowed the local Grimmers to get around a lack of reliable, faster-than-light transportation by simultaneously being on both sides of the anomaly at once. Jerry felt beads of sweat began to form on his forehead as he attempted to calibrate the navigational computer for the jump. A bright red "Error" message appeared on the screen was his only reward for his attempt. Muttering under his breath, he attempted to calibrate the navigational computer again. The computer's reply was a bright red "Error" message with no further information. Before he could ask the computer to clarify, the anomaly rippled and a massive boxy ship appeared right in front of him in a blinding flash of blue light. Pilot check to avoid getting rammed by the incoming ship. Target number 13, 13 total on the dot. Jerry quickly grabs the controls and barely manages to avoid impacting with the prow of the incoming ship. The Orion Mouse had no idea who made this ship or what it was for, but going off of its size, it was definitely someone's idea of a capital ship. "Attention all foreign ships," a voice boomed in the local common language over the general channel. Jerry was glad he took the time to learn this Grimmer speak that seemed to be commonly used by all the major powers here. "This is the VES Ancestral Fury. This system is part of the Vodicon Empire. Identify yourselves and state your business," the ship continued. A big ship, likely a battleship, and a very ornate one. A massive golden face and golden engravings lined the otherwise obsidian black hull. Jerry counted 2 prow weapons and no less than half a dozen different turrets. The metalwork vaguely reminded him of a human novel he read once. Lord of the Rings, he believed it was called. The pirates uttered a series of barely intelligible curses about the ancestral fury being crewed by a bunch of stumpy, spineless busybodies, but quickly turned tail and ran once the Vodicon warship fully engaged its engines. Attention other unidentified vessel. Please respond. For an instant, Jerry thought the strangers had forgotten about him after the pirates interjected. Oh well, not like he had much to lose. Ancestral Fury, I'm receiving you. I am Jerry Riggs, former helmsman of the Cerberus exploration vessel. My ship was destroyed by space pirates and I escaped capture by stealing one of their fighters. Jerry replied, cursing the pirates for making the decision to make the communicator audio only. There was a pause, almost too long of a pause for Jerry's comfort. Then the Fury's comm officer was replaced by another voice, an older one that spoke with an experience Jerry immediately recognized. This was the ship's captain. Cerberus, you say? That the exploration vessel that came through the Acronumbra wormhole? The big purple one above us? Yes, we came through that, Jerry replied, hoping he did not give the answer that would get him blown up. To come so far. Well, Mr. Riggs, you're a very popular person with the Truth Seekers. They've been looking for you ever since they started finding your crewmates. My contact won't tell me exactly why they're so interested in finding you, but if you came through the Arcanumbra, then I definitely have a lot of questions for you. Let's get you aboard and see where we go from there, the captain answered as Jerry's fighter thudded with the sound of a tractor beam grabbing the hull and pulling him in. Jerry disabled the fighter's weapons and engines, letting himself be pulled into the Fury's hangar. Whatever happened next, he hoped it was not as bad as the nightmare he just escaped. Maybe now he would be able to get a shower and a place to sleep without the voice whispering in his mind. You survived? The voice asked, its disbelief apparent. Yes, I did. I took a chance and it worked. Jerry replied defiantly as the fighter was docked in an empty hangar. As the landing struts extended and the engines powered down, he opened the canopy hatch above him and let the warm, fresh air of the Fury wash over him. 1 week later. A week later, the Cerberus had docked with the Ancestral Fury on the border between the Thriftic Binary and the Vodakun Empire. Detective Abraham Shields led both of the Cerberus's crew and a handful of his own agents onto the Vodi ship to pick up Jerry Riggs and trade notes with the ship's captain. Apparently, Jerry had traded something very interesting that he had stolen from the pirates in exchange for asylum, and the captain was so interested by it that he wanted to share what he found. Walking next to Blossom, the Cerberus's Urson engineer, Robert Manus kept his mouth shut and his face as expressionless as he could. Seeing the Fury's ornate hull on the flyby, his first thought was space dwarves. But when he boarded the Voti battleship and saw them in the flesh, he could see that the Voti were very much not dwarves. Slightly shorter than the average Sol Federation human and looking like huge hunks of muscle sculpted into a roughly humanoid form, the extremely stocky Vodi clearly hailed from a planet with a much higher gravity than Earth normal. Which is why he kept his mouth shut. He didn't trust himself to avoid cracking a joke about animated princesses, ancestral supercomputers, or battle cries of rock and stone. Best case scenario, the Vodi wouldn't get it and think he was insane, which would be pretty accurate. Worst case scenario, he would discover just how dwarven their tempers were. And after seeing and meeting his 8th Vodi Marine, the legendary cyborg warriors that defended the Vodakun Empire with plasma swords and shoulder-mounted anti-personnel ordnance cannons cybernetically mounted onto their shoulders, Robert Manus was not tempted to test Vodakun soldiering against his nation's own. So it was with some small relief that they finally arrived in the captain's office where Captain Starcutter and Jerry were waiting for them. Almost immediately, Blossom squealed Jerry's name and scooped him up in a tight hug. The short mouse practically vanished in the tall panda's embrace as she squished him and slowly nuzzled the top of his head against her chin. Both Detective Shields and Captain Starcutter stared at the display, but Robert merely shook his head. It's an Orion thing. You learn to just accept it if you work with him long enough. Anyway, thank you for fishing our friend out of the void, sir. Yes, well, Detective Shields and I have helped each other in the past, so it wasn't too much of a favor, Starcutter replied modestly. Yeah, especially after that little incident with the Sundermage cult on Devious 4, Shields' piece interjected electronically. You're never going to let the captain forget about that one, are you, Mulder? Abraham replied dismissively. Nope, the self-aware handgun replied with a smug tone. Starcutter gave the ARC cop a look like they had gone through this before a few times before turning back to Robert. As I was going to say, Sergeant Robert Manus, was it? Anyway, it also wasn't too much of a favor given that your friend gave us some very useful, if disturbing, bits of intelligence. Yes, Sergeant Robert Manus of the Sol Federation Army. One nation of the Milky Way galaxy. One galaxy out of several on the other side of that big wormhole, if our experiments were correct. The Orion Commonwealth are our neighbors in our home galaxy, Robert replied dutifully. There was no point in holding back that much if Shields had already told the captain to keep an eye out for the missing crew of the Cerberus. I thought I recognized the fellow soldier. Anyway, as I was saying, your friend stole a space superiority fighter that had been modified by the Sung Corsarium and surrendered it. My engineers have been going over it, and what they've discovered disturbs me, the veteran Vodi naval captain continued. The who, sir? Psychotic space pirates unaffiliated with the five polities, or anyone for that matter. Absolutely fearless to the point of insanity and with an armada larger than any one polity can hope to beat, Abraham interjected automatically before turning back to the captain. So how are they trying to upgrade their fighters this time, sir? He asked with an exasperated sigh. Robert noted the words, this time. If my chief engineer is correct, there's a Corsarium mechanic somewhere that is experimenting with miniaturized gravity induction drives and ablative golem moon plating. Shields exhaled. Well, at least half of that is something the truth seekers can deal with. The polities can miniaturize the GIDs, but never did because it just wasn't practical enough. But making hull platum out of golem moon metal? Don't they only use that for a Captain Saber? He asked. I thought they did, but apparently not anymore, Starcutter replied. Seeing that Blossom and Jerry had been listening to the conversation and were looking as lost as he felt, Robert interrupted. Sorry, stupid question. What is the Golem Moon, and why should we be scared of it? Starcutter looked back at Robert with a serious look in his eyes. As the story goes, the Golem Moon is a rogue planetoid that roams the galaxy. Made entirely out of a strange biometal that psychically feeds off of fear. It searches for frightened minds to feed on. No one I know has seen it. If it weren't for the sabers the Corsarium captains wield, we would have thought the planet was a ghost story they created. But apparently there is a ritual where an aspiring Shung captain must make a pilgrimage to the Golem Moon to prove that he is without fear. If by some miracle he succeeds, he leaves with a saber of pure Golem Moon metal that is as much of a badge of office as it is a weapon. At least, that is how the story goes. So imagine my shock when my chief engineer tells me he pulled off a hunk of the stuff so big it almost started to cover the pilot's canopy of Mr. Riggs' fighter. Another day or two and that death trap of a fighter craft might have sealed him in, the captain replied. The room grew quiet as they realized just how close Jerry had been aimed to being sealed alive in his own ship with no food or water, completely at the mercy of a hunk of psychic biometal. End of session.